The sky over Dakota Territory looked split open, half gold, half bruised purple, as if the day couldn't decide whether to stay or flee. A lone wagon crawled along the ridge. Camera angled tight on the wheels, grinding through the dust. Then a slow upward pan reveals him. Jonas Redden, a widowed homesteader who had learned to keep his voice quiet and his heart quieter. He stopped when he saw her. A woman standing in the open field, dress soaked, hair tangled from rain that hadn't even reached him yet. She looked like she'd stepped out of another world. Not lost, not afraid, just waiting. Jonas called out, but the wind swallowed his words. She didn't answer. She only raised one hand, palm trembling, as if she felt something moving in the ground beneath them. Then it hit, a distant rumble, low and wrong. Not thunder, something heavier. Jonas scanned the horizon. Nothing, but the woman pointed again, sharply now, toward the canyon. Her eyes urgent, certain. Curiosity trigger. Why would a stranger know danger before it even showed itself? Jonas followed her gaze and finally saw it. A herd of wild buffalo charging blind to the canyon pass, straight toward the grazing cattle he'd left out earlier that morning. She had warned him before sound, before dust, before any sign at all. He turned back to her, stunned, but she was already walking toward his wagon, as if she knew he'd asked for help. And for the first time in years, Jonas felt something he thought he'd buried with his wife. Hope. Jonas drove the wagon hard, racing the buffalo toward the far pasture. Camera shakes gently with the wheels, dust rising like smoke. The mysterious woman rode beside him, hands gripping the seat, eyes fixed on land as if she could read it like scripture. When they reached the pasture, Jonas leapt down, waving his arms, guiding his cattle towards safer ground. What should have taken an hour took minutes. Every time a steer hesitated, the woman simply stepped forward, calm, steady, and the animal moved as if understanding her without a sound. Not once did she speak. Not once did she flinch. Not once did she hesitate. When the danger passed, she finally exhaled, a small breath, but heavy with relief. Jonas approached her slowly. "Who are you?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the wooden slate inside his wagon, the one he used for marking supplies. With careful fingers, she wrote a single name, Lyra. Then she tapped her ear, then shook her head. Not deaf, just disconnected from sound. Her world ran differently. Jonas studied her, a woman alone in storm-wet clothes, appearing before danger, reading the land better than any rancher alive. It didn't add up. She pointed to the sky again. The storm she walked out of was finally drifting toward them. Thunder rolled far off, matching the weight in Jonas's chest. Curiosity trigger. Why would a woman with no voice, no past, and no belongings walk straight toward a stranger's ranch as if she belonged there? Lyra stepped back into the wagon, settling in the corner as if she already knew he'd offer her shelter. And the truth? He would. Night settled over Jonas's homestead like a slow-falling curtain. Lantern light flickered through the cabin windows, warm against the storm-dark world outside. Camera draws in tight on the doorway as Jonas steps aside, letting Lyra enter first. She moved carefully, touching nothing at first, just observing, as if memorizing every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the air, every flicker of firelight. Jonas set a kettle over the stove. The rain drummed the roof in uneven taps. Lyra's eyes followed the rhythm, not like someone hearing it, but like someone feeling each drop through her bones. When Jonas handed her a blanket, she paused. Her fingers brushed his, hesitant, then certain. Not affection, recognition. Almost like she already understood him better than anyone had since his wife passed. She pointed to his arm next, brow tightening. Jonas frowned. He hadn't noticed a scratch from the brush he'd run through earlier, but she had. Her attention was sharp, precise. Lyra tore a strip from her own sleeve, clean cloth, surprisingly fine, and wrapped his arm with quiet focus. Jonas watched her hands move, gentle yet sure. He couldn't ignore the question rising in him. How could a woman with no voice, no sound, and no past arrive already knowing the land, the danger, and now him? Curiosity trigger. What truth is Lyra carrying that she can't or won't speak? As the storm growled outside, she turned toward the window, the wind brushing her hair like something familiar. Jonas followed her gaze. For a moment neither moved. Neither spoke. But something had shifted between them, a trust forming in silence, a connection born the moment she stepped out of the storm. And Jonas felt his life bending in a direction he couldn't name yet. The storm eased toward midnight, leaving the land washed clean and trembling. Camera drifted slowly across the quiet cabin. Glow of dying embers, softest in the kettle, shadows stretching long on log walls. Jonas sat at the table, drying his boots, but his eyes kept drifting to Lyra. She stood barefoot near the doorway, one hand against the frame, as if listening to something no one else could feel. Not to sound, to movement, to rhythm, to the pulse of the land itself. Then it happened. A faint tremor rolled beneath the cabin floorboards. Barely there. A shiver, not a shake. Jonas didn't notice, but Lyra did. Her head lifted sharply. Her breath stopped. Her entire body went still, like a deer catching a scent on the wind. She turned to Jonas and tapped the table twice. Urgent. Firm. He frowned. What is it? She grabbed a second slate and wrote quickly, her handwriting sharp and angled. Ground moving. Barn unsafe. Jonas blinked. The barn? It's solid as they come. But she shook her head, eyes dark with certainty, and pointed toward the door. Jonas stepped outside with a lantern. Camera follows from behind, rainwater shimmering on packed earth. He walked toward the barn, doubting, until he saw it. The foundation had shifted, just slightly, one corner sinking into soft earth where the storm had washed away soil. One more good rain, and the whole support beam might give. His breath caught. She had felt that. She had known before he even looked. When Jonas returned to cabin, Lyra waited by the fire, hands clasped, expression unreadable. He set the lantern down and met her eyes fully for the first time since she arrived. How? Not harsh, not fearful, just a man demanding truth. She looked toward the window, then placed her palm flat against the wooden floor, then on her own chest, then back to the window again. Not hearing, feeling, sensing, understanding the world differently. Jonas swallowed hard. This woman wasn't lost. She wasn't helpless. She was carrying something big, something unexplainable, something she'd been alone with for too long. Curiosity trigger. What past could teach a woman to understand danger before it ever arrives? Jonas pulled out a chair for her. Lyra, he said softly, sit. Tell me whatever you can. And for the first time since she stepped out of the storm, she hesitated. The storm left the cabin wrapped in a soft, uneasy quiet. Camera pushes in slowly on the table between them. Two people, one lantern, a truth sitting heavy in the room. Lyra lowered herself into the chair Jonas offered, but her posture stayed guarded. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. She took the slate again, not eager, but resolved, and wrote a single line. I was raised where silence was safer than sound. Jonas's jaw tightened. He didn't push, didn't interrupt. She continued writing, slower this time, each word carrying weight. Family moved often. Towns disliked what I sensed. Said it was witch work. Said silence meant secrets. Her hand paused. She didn't look up. Jonas inhaled sharply. Not fear or anger. Not at her. At the world she'd stumbled out of. She tapped the slate again. Harder. I learned to feel storms before clouds. Ground shifts before cracks. Animals before danger. People before pain. Then she finally met his eyes. Her expression wasn't asking for belief, or pity, or protection. It was the expression of someone tired of running. Jonas leaned back slowly, lantern light catching the rough lines of his face. He'd met liars, drifters, preachers, thieves. None looked like Lyra. None carried truth that quietly. He spoke gently. You're safe here. She blinked once, as if she didn't understand the sentence, as if no one had offered her safety without conditions before. She wrote one more line, smaller, almost fragile. For how long? Jonas closed the distance between them with a simple motion. He placed his large, callous hand over her trembling fingers to stop the slate from shaking. As long as you want. Her breath broke, just a tiny, silent release, but her eyes softened for the first time since he'd met her. Curiosity trigger. Lyra accepted safety, but what past is still following her? And outside, unnoticed by both, the wind changed direction, carrying something toward them. Morning broke pale and cold, the kind of light that makes the prairie look honest and unforgiving. Camera opens on the frost across the field. Thin, brittle, shimmering. Jonas stepped out to check the horses, breath clouding in the early chill. Lyra followed, her step soft, her hair braided loosely down her back. She paused halfway to the barn, not because of the cold, because the earth under her boots shifted differently. Subtle, wrong. Jonas noticed a change in her face before he heard anything. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Far off. One rider. Fast. Jonas turned toward the ridge. A lone horseman cutting across the prairie. Coat snapping behind him like a loose flag. Lyra went still. Completely still. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but recognition. Jonas stepped closer. You know him? She didn't nod. Didn't shake her head. Just pressed her hand lightly against her chest, then closed her fist. A gesture heavy with history. The rider grew clearer, dust rising behind him. Hat low, a man who rode with purpose. Not curiosity, not wandering. Purpose. Jonas felt his stomach tighten. The horseman reached the gate, slowed, and dismounted with a wince, as if carrying old anger in his bones. He looked at Jonas first, then his gaze slid to Lyra, and something in his expression twisted. Relief? Rage? Possession? Jonas couldn't read it, but Lyra could. Her shoulders tightened, her breathing shortened. Her hands curled slightly, the way they had when she wrote about the places she fled. The rider stepped forward. I've been looking for you, he said, not to Jonas. To her. Lyra didn't move. Jonas stepped between them, calm but firm. State your business. The man's jaw flexed. She owes answers, he said, and she left before giving any. Lyra's breast shuddered silently through her chest. Curiosity trigger. Why did Lyra run from a man who claimed she owes him answers? And what truth is she still hiding? Jonas stood taller. Whatever this was, he wasn't letting it sweep her away again. The rider stood just inside the gate, boots dusted from hard miles, jaw tight enough to crack stone. Camera eases in on Jonas's stance, square, calm, refusing to budge. Behind him, Lyra stayed close to the barn wall, fingers pressed lightly against the wood, grounding herself in its stillness. The man spat into the dirt. She didn't tell you, did she? His eyes burned with something tangled, resentment wrapped in something like grief. Jonas didn't blink. Tell me what? The rider pointed sharply at Lyra. She wasn't wandering. She was running, and she left people behind who depended on her. His voice scraped rough. She knew things she couldn't explain. Drove folks crazy trying to understand her. When storms came, she was always right. When sickness hit, she felt it first. But instead of staying, she vanished. Lyra's breath trembled. Not guilt, recognition. She had heard this story before, lived it in too many towns. The man continued, voice rising. You can't just leave people who trust you. You can't walk out without a word. Jonas cut him off. She doesn't speak. And yet somehow she always knows. The rider shot back. That's the problem. Lyra shook her head. Slow. Firm. She stepped closer, writing on her slate with steady, deliberate strokes. I left because fear grew louder than truth. The rider stiffened when he read it. His expression cracked, grief slipping through. They thought you were cursed, he whispered. They weren't scared of the storms. They were scared of you. Jonas felt something inside him shift. Lyra wrote again. I only feel danger. I don't cause it. The man swallowed hard. I know that. His eyes softened. But you didn't stay long enough to hear the rest. Lyra froze. Jonas watched her carefully. What rest? The rider exhaled, shoulders breaking under weight he'd carried too long. They weren't hunting her, he said. They were following her to safety. Curiosity trigger. If those she fled weren't chasing her with blame, what were they chasing her for? Lyra stared at him, slate trembling slightly in her hands.
The rider left just after midday, the sun warming the frost into thin silver threads. As his silhouette faded over the ridge, the world around Jonas's ranch felt strangely lighter. As if a weight Lyra had carried for years had finally slipped free. Camera drifts slowly toward Lyra at the fence line. Her hands rested on the top rail, her breath steady now, her gaze wide and unafraid. For the first time, she wasn't listening for danger. She was simply listening. Jonas approached, boots crunching in soft earth. He didn't speak at first, he'd learned her rhythm, her silences, the unspoken language that lived between moments. Lyra turned toward him, face calm but full. Not frightened. Not uncertain. Just open. She lifted her slate and wrote, "I don't want to run anymore." Jonas felt the words hit deep. He placed a hand on the fence beside hers, close enough to feel her warmth but not pushing. "Then don't," he said softly. "Not unless you choose to." She stared at him long enough for the wind to shift direction twice. Then she wrote again, slow, delicate strokes that made Jonas's heart thrum. "You feel steady. Even when I do not." Jonas exhaled, a quiet, honest breath that carried every lonely year he'd lived. He reached for her hand. Not grabbing. Not claiming. Just offering. She didn't pull away. Instead, she placed her palm against his. A gesture more intimate than any kiss. A way of saying, "I choose this. I choose you." Her eyes softened, shimmering in sunlight. Then, slowly, she lifted her free hand to his chest. Right over his heart. A touch that wasn't asking permission. A touch that wasn't afraid. For a woman who spoke little, her meaning was thunderclear. Jonas leaned forward, forehead gently touching hers, breath mingling with hers in the quiet warmth. A single curiosity trigger hummed between them, unspoken. If she chose him today, what life might they build tomorrow? The rider left just after midday, the sun warming the frost into thin silver threads. As his silhouette faded over the ridge, the world around Jonas's ranch felt strangely lighter. As if a weight Lyra had carried for years had finally slipped free. Camera drifts slowly toward Lyra at the fence line. Her hands rested on the top rail, her breath steady now, her gaze wide and unafraid. For the first time, she wasn't listening for danger. She was simply listening. Jonas approached, boots crunching in soft earth. He didn't speak at first, he'd learned her rhythm, her silences, the unspoken language that lived between moments. Lyra turned toward him, face calm but full. Not frightened. Not uncertain. Just open. She lifted her slate and wrote, "I don't want to run anymore." Jonas felt the words hit deep. He placed a hand on the fence beside hers, close enough to feel her warmth but not pushing. "Then don't," he said softly. "Not unless you choose to." She stared at him long enough for the wind to shift direction twice. Then she wrote again, slow, delicate strokes that made Jonas's heart thrum. "You feel steady. Even when I do not." Jonas exhaled, a quiet, honest breath that carried every lonely year he'd lived. He reached for her hand. Not grabbing. Not claiming. Just offering. She didn't pull away. Instead, she placed her palm against his. A gesture more intimate than any kiss. A way of saying, "I choose this. I choose you." Her eyes softened, shimmering in sunlight. Then, slowly, she lifted her free hand to his chest. Right over his heart. A touch that wasn't asking permission. A touch that wasn't afraid. For a woman who spoke little, her meaning was thunderclear. Jonas leaned forward, forehead gently touching hers, breath mingling with hers in the quiet warmth. A single curiosity trigger hummed between them, unspoken. If she chose him today, what life might they build tomorrow? Spring settled over the plains like a soft blanket, warm enough to heal what winter had bruised. Camera opens wide on the homestead, green stretching in every direction, sunlight pooling across the pasture, the cabin standing solid against the horizon. Inside, the morning light spilled through the windows, brushing Lyra's face with gold as she kneaded dough at the table. Jonas watched from the doorway, arms crossed, something gentle tugging at his expression. She sensed him before she saw him, she always did. Turning, she wiped flour from her hands and met his gaze with a smile so quiet it felt sacred. Jonas stepped closer and set a small wooden box on the table. "Made this for you," he said, voice low and steady. Lyra opened it. Inside rested a set of smooth wooden tiles, carved with symbols she recognized instantly. Her signs. Her language. Her voice, shaped by his hands. She touched one, a trembling gratitude warming her eyes. Then she looked up at him, and without a slate, without a tile, she shaped the words carefully with her lips. Soft, unsteady, but clear. "Thank you, Jonas." It was the first time he'd heard her voice. Not perfect. Not practiced. But real. Jonas swallowed hard, the sound thick in the morning stillness. She stepped closer, placing one hand over his heart, the other over her own, aligning the rhythms like she had the day danger first brought them together. And then he said what he'd been carrying for months. "Stay with me. Not because you need to, but because you want to." Lyra didn't hesitate. She nodded once, slow, certain, her eyes warm with a depth few ever earn. Outside, a soft breeze rolled across the land, carrying the gentle scent of wild sage. Camera pans to the wide prairie, glowing in the sun. Here, on soil she once feared, she found peace. Here, in a rancher who listened to silence, she found home. Not a place. A person. Their days became a steady, quiet miracle. Horses gentled under her touch. Neighbors visited not with suspicion, but with gratitude. And Jonas, who once lived in grief, learned to smile again in the warmth of a woman who felt the world deeper than sound could ever reach. If love had a language, there's needed no words. Just two hearts, finally unafraid to be heard.